Hello and welcome to Earth Day Always. It's April 22nd, 2023, and we've got a great lineup for you. Walter Hood is a professor at UC Berkeley and a MacArthur Fellow. Alma Soongi Beck is a lawyer and founder of ClimateHope.us. Renay Jenkins is a climate activist in San Francisco. Tania Abdul is founder and executive director of Breathe. Samantha Paladini is Climate Resilience Coordinator with Crew. Carleen Cullen is co-founder and executive director of Cool the Earth. Neish is executive director of 350 Bay Area and 350 Bay Area Action. And Chance Cutrano is director of programs at Resource Renewal Institute. I hope you'll find them as inspiring as I do. Alrighty, we're here with Walter Hood, who is, as I was just telling him, the first genius I've ever really known. And Walter, I want you to give us your humble introduction to what we do, or what you do, I should say.
Okay. Well, Kevin James Morrison, it's a pleasure to reconnect with you after many, many, many years. But I would say, my working title would be professor. I teach at University of California, Berkeley in the Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning program. I have multiple degrees in architecture, landscape architecture, urban design, and art. I'd like to consider myself as a designer, but I have a studio firm that I've had for 25 years here in Oakland, California, that we do primarily landscape architecture and art and urbanism. I've now focusing more in the work more on art these days, but we still do that foundational work. There's about 18 of us now. So I've actually been able to have some really great people come up in the studio, and now they're actually taking a lot of this work and doing it without me, which is actually fantastic because the ethic is still there. Again, we're still in West Oakland, and so we're still trying to fight the good fight for people who feel like they're not represented in the world.
So, full disclosure, Walter and I used to be neighbors when I had a studio in Oakland, right there on the Emeryville border. It was my pleasure to be his neighbor. And I gotta say, when we first got to know each other in the 90s, as much as climate and planet stewardship was part of the conversation, it has become, so important in the last 25 years. I'm wondering if you feel that and how it impacts your work.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you say that. The 90s, was a time that I think, particularly out here in California, culture was the kind of the big C word, multiculturalism, and it was Rodney King, OJ, there's big kind of cultural moments. But, you started out talking about Earth Day, and so that's back in the 70s. And so in a way, the way we think about ecology and environment from a landscape architecture perspective, that's always been kind of part of our thinking. So it never dropped off the scale for us, but I think for popular culture, and particularly for Americans, we tend to only be able to focus on one thing at a time, unfortunately. But I do think, we have to get stronger at understanding this dialectic between, the environment that's out there and the things we make and how we want to live, and that they're tied together. And so we can't kind of look at these kind of cultural, racial issues without thinking about the ecological issues. And a lot of historians lump that together in ecological history. So when we're talking about ecology, then we cannot exclude people. And when you don't exclude people, then that makes it much more complex. And it's easier to exclude people because you can say, oh, the sea is rising. But you have to think about people because it's going to rise on someone, and it's being exacerbated by our development of these areas that's actually going to allow the waters to rise. And so, again, to restate, I think environmental designers, we've always thought about this since the late 60s, early 70s. But again, we're very good at only sound bites at a time. And I think we got to get out of the sound bite mentality.
Absolutely. It reminds me, too, that this is one of those discussions that when people come to it from a certain perspective that is entrenched, oh, that global warming, it's nonsense. We've always had variations. It's really hard to explain why it's important to think about. And I'm wondering, do you find yourself having to explain how your work fits in, how it allows for, how it considers environment and climate change, and just things that are contentious in some places?
Well, a lot of our early work, we're in kind of marginal, poor, brown and black neighborhoods, and so there's no convincing there that we need to do because people are living in those environments, right, where there is a freeway 2 blocks away. I can actually hear it. I can't see the particle matter that's basically going into my lungs, but that's there. People have to deal with those things. And so working in these areas, it's easier in these areas where we're working, but it's not the primary, need most of the time. And so in areas where we need to focus on environment, actually poverty, other things are higher. In areas where we have the leisure time to think about it, that's where it gets complicated. And that's where people are, I find, more deniers because they have the resources to not feel like they're being impacted by a lot of these ideas, whether it's, sea level rise, flooding, whether it's, economic issues that deal with like food deserts and things like that. If you live in the hills behind me, flooding is probably not a big thing for you. The sewage treatment plant is not a big thing for you, all of those things. And so it's really trying to get, resources that go into places that the most vulnerable to actually put these ecological issues up higher and that they can just be as high as housing. So we can think about housing as well as we can think about ecology, but we end up going housing, and we don't think about ecology. And so it's a kind of a weird, place that we're in a lot of the times because it's almost like we're just putting out fires. We're not thinking ahead and trying to be preventative in a lot of these places where we need to be.
I want to be sure to ask you about something that, I don't want to say it's equally important. I don't want to draw comparisons because whether you think it's equally important or not doesn't matter. But to me, it's this, the notion that the artistry that you bring, the thought-provoking nature of your work is so important to the way people take in the landscape, wherever they are, whether it's a park or part of a museum or whatever. Is that something that you find yourself, you find yourself thinking about it, obviously, but you find yourself talking about as well to people, that this is another part of life that we all need wherever we live?
Yeah, and I think the easiest part of what we do in the studio is going to places and getting people to see the place in which they live unfettered, right? Because those are the tools. It's like if I'm working in Wyoming, which we've worked in, it's like to understand that it's a glaciated landscape. And so geology is a big thing. And people are like, oh, wow, you're talking about our landscape in a different way. But to get people to kind of see that almost primal view of the place in which they live, I think then we can take a step back and people can see value there. A lot of the times we don't take that time and think about it in that way, like the Bay Area. I remember, and you probably remember, when it rained all the time. It rained in the winter. And when I first moved out here, I was like, wow, it's monsoonal. But people didn't like using the term monsoonal. And I was like, but we use it in India. We use it in other places that get all of their rain in one period of time. Because once you start thinking that way, you then have to act in that way. And so for us not to think of it that way and then go into drought, and now we have this other horizontal rivers. I mean, we have these things that I've never even heard of like, no, it used to rain like this. This used to be the pure cycle that we went through. And so again, the more we can talk about these places in which we lived in a very clear way, I think it gives us ways to think about how we want to live in the places. And unfortunately, we come up with these fictions that help those who are privileged live the best life in places. And so we got to get out of those fictions, right? Those fictions they're not good for people down here, but they're definitely not good for people up here as well, because we see what the issues are.
Yes. In fact, a couple of folks that we're having on this very broadcast are talking about environmental justice in particular, which is another concept that is hard for lots of people to wrap their heads around. I mean, it requires a conversation, and we have that conversation. And then if we're lucky, there's head nodding and go, oh, I get it now. All right, let's close this with a couple of high notes. What big projects do you have opening up this year, Walter?
Oh, wow, big ones. The International African American Museum in Charleston, going to be opening on Juneteenth in Charleston, South Carolina. We're finishing up Jacksonville, Florida. It's the site is the site of James Weldon Johnson, his family, and his brother. They are the original authors of the African American National Anthem. We're presenting in the Venice Biennale in Venice in May. And there we're taking a project that we worked on a decade ago, a Gullah Geechee community outside of Charleston. We're designing a native architecture for them. They're called basket houses. And we're showing how over 110 years, how this Gullah community has basically lived on a piece of land for over 100 years, but they actually can teach us how to be more ecological through their development of that land and through our project. Those are just a few of the projects that are coming up. And we have a big exhibit opening up in Auburn in September. And that one's called Ark of Life, Ark of Bones. And there we're building an actual boat to actually get baptized in the Alabama River and come back to the museum. And it basically creates a context for discussion around lynching, around the kind of the power of water in that landscape, and accompanying them will be 10 original paintings that are biographical by nature of my life. So.
Okay, well, here, I thought I knew one or two, and I did know one or two things coming up, but I'm glad to know that all these things are coming up. I am so delighted we took this time, because I'm going to be talking to people now and in the future about how we all, are part of this planet and need to be better stewards, and we all have to think about things kind of the way you are. So congratulations, man.
Oh, thank you so much, man. And in parting, I'm actually going to become the chairman of the department over at Cal the next couple of years. So you might get an invitation to come over to Berkeley.
Well, clearly,
and reminisce with me. So just letting you know, heads up.
That would be much deserved. And clearly between now and then, there will have to be a beer raised between the two of us at some point.
Sounds great, man. Sounds great. Well, I'm glad you're doing well. And thanks for reaching out, man. And we should do this more often. And once we get the building completed, we would love to have you come over as well and teach us how to do podcasts.
All right. I will look forward to it. Walter, take care of yourself, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon.
All right. We are here with Alma Soongi Beck, and it's been a pleasure and privilege for me to know her for a little bit of time and see the amazing work she does. She started her own nonprofit. When I say her own nonprofit, Alma, you're going to correct me and tell me about all the people who work with you, the scope of the work, but starting there, tell our viewers a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kevin, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Alma Soongi Beck. I use she, her pronouns in English. In Korean, my name is Baek Soongi. And I suppose I'm now a climate activist, and I have been for a number of years. It took a while to figure out how to get into climate activism. I think I was faced with the issue that a lot of people are faced with, which I was very concerned. I would get news about climate and the changing climate and how it impacted different people, including us, but also people around the world. And, was trying to figure out how to plug in. So I had the fortune of having a friend invite me to watch Inconvenient Truth and then Inconvenient Sequel, which are Vice President Al Gore's movies. And that was in 2016. And then she invited me actually to come to the Climate Reality Project training. So that's how it started. And then I think it was because I had a friend who invited me. I mean, that's pretty much like I was trying to figure out what the path was. I was struggling. I would look at it and then not look at it. I'd be like, what is this about? How do I take action? And then she's like, well, try this. And I did. And then I got to do it with her for a little bit. And we kind of started gathering people as we went, which I think is the best way to do it.
I got to ask, do you find now, as an official climate activist, you find yourself dealing with people who are sort of a little behind you on the path, and you can reflect on this and say, okay, I get you. Here's what might work for you, or let's talk about what you might want to do.
I absolutely do. And, it's hard because I think there's a lot of people who are trying to figure out what to do or feel like they need to know more or they need to be more central to it. But, I went to a talk once by a woman who's African-American, and she talked about how everything we do is a victory for the planet, no matter how small it feels. And I think that was a really important message that helped carry me through these places where it felt like, oh, this is not significant. And I still come back to that. Like, everything we do is a victory for the planet. And every time we can figure out how to show up is a victory for the planet. And I think that's just important because our feelings of insignificance are going to come up around something so big. The climate crisis is a global climate crisis. It involves governments and businesses and history and lots of institutions that are aware or unaware of kind of impacts. So I do believe we can solve it. And even on those days where I don't believe we can solve it, I have to hold out to myself, wait, I remember believing that we could solve it, or being around people who look like they believe that we can solve it. Because otherwise, what are we going to do? Just sit here, hide underneath our covers, and then just hope that it doesn't get us, because it's already getting us. We had 16 atmospheric rivers in California from December through March. That's a lot of atmospheric rivers. And it involved a bomb cyclone and trees falling and people dying and people losing power. It was just like one thing after the another. And you were here, so you experienced it too. So I guess getting back to kind of your question, which is, people that might not be as far along the journey, that's fine. Start now. Find somebody to do it with. And that's really kind of where I started getting to, because I got plugged in in the climate justice team at our local chapter of Climate Reality Project, which is how I met you. And getting to focus on climate justice and think about racial justice was, for me, the big motivator. Because I've been in all these circles of people thinking about racial justice and Indigenous justice and LGBTQ justice and gender justice, all of that for years. And then the climate conversation would come up. I'd be like, this needs to be more central in those circles, and those circles need to be more central in the climate conversation. So that just seemed to be the right place to plug in. And I wasn't sure what we were going to come up with, but we've come up with some cool stuff.
Yes, you have. And I'm so glad that you have done that, because it's opened my eyes in many ways and given me new ways to think about ideas. I'm glad you're talking about anything with the word justice in it, because lots of people, I'm sure you've bumped into this, once you say something like environmental justice or climate justice, for whatever reason, that seems a bridge too far. Like, racial justice, they sort of get, but how do you explain environmental or climate justice?
Well, I think there's many different ways people will explain it, but I like to explain environmental justice as, well, what is environmental injustice? It's unjust and unjust negative impacts on certain communities of environmental hazards and harms. And I would say the same thing about climate justice, which is in unjust and unequal, disproportionate impacts on certain communities of the impacts of the climate crisis. And they overlap, and they're not exactly kind of like the exact same thing. Environmental justice movements have been around for a while, but we are in a system that was built on racism and attempted genocide. And it's hard to say those words because it makes people feel kind of a little like this. And my project is Climate Hope. My project is about joy, love, and optimism. But I think that the joy, love, and optimism is about, who are the people we love and know, and who are the people we don't yet know and love. And, I do believe that at the essence of all humans is our understanding that we're connected to other humans, and all those places where we can't tell. That is the place that we need to look at and actually overcome in order to solve the global climate crisis and to solve environmental injustices. I was just at a talk this morning by a climate activist who lives in Kenya, and she was, again, talking about the important link of ending oppression with ending the climate crisis, because the same forces that created these systems, I was born after all of these systems were created, but I still have to take responsibility, even though it isn't my personal fault that the system of, servitude and slavery was created and that attempted genocide was attempted on this continent. But I live here, so I have to be willing to look at it and be like, what are those systems? How do we dismantle those systems? Today, I'm wearing my End Racism shirt. And I want to offer it kind of in the spirit of joy and optimism, which is the reason we want, and we can end racism is the same reason we want to and can end the climate crisis, but they're linked. If we're not willing to look at one, we're not going to be able to solve the other. The reason we have a climate crisis is because we have these systems of extraction that we're willing to sacrifice people and land and communities at the expense of profit for a certain small group of people. And that's not right. A couple of weeks ago, Pope Francis reversed the doctrine of discovery. And if you haven't heard of the doctrine of discovery, it's the doctrine that centuries ago the Catholic Church put out to justify attempted genocide on this continent. And basically, the Bible says thou shalt not kill. And that's been a really important tenet of Judaism and Christianity. And yet the church justified genocide of people on this continent because they said they weren't Christian. So that's been a doctrine for several hundred years, but it was made up to justify that at that time. And so now Pope Francis, I think after meeting with Indigenous people in Canada, went back and realized that was wrong. That was human error in interpreting how the Bible should be exercised. And they reversed it, which is so incredibly hopeful. We are reversing these systems. And yeah, it might take us a few hundred years. It is incredibly tragic what has happened in this continent, but we have to be willing to look at it so that then we could figure out what needs to be reversed. So, I don't know if I answered exactly the question, but that's kind of where my mind went in terms of yes, we do this because we love people. We do this because of our love for our communities and our families and all the people that we know and the people we don't yet know. But it doesn't take long to hear from a climate activist in Kenya to then fall in love with them and realize, oh, they're human like we are. They're just trying to figure out how to support their families and live a thriving life. And oh my gosh, here are all the things that my country and government is doing or has done, and what can I do to, the plastic problem, right? A lot of people look at recycling and they're like, okay, I'll just recycle better. And unfortunately, a lot of our recycling gets exported to other countries on the African continent, in Latin America, and Asia. And I didn't know this until I heard from her talking about that. Thankfully, Kenya actually had a plastic ban in 2017, but unfortunately, she was saying our government tried to convince them to reverse their plastic ban so they could keep exporting plastic. So now I'm like, what does that mean in terms of how we think about recycling? And so I think part of what it means is not only do we have to figure out how to recycle better, but we also have to figure out where our recycling's going. Like recycling better is kind of this bigger picture where we want it to not be part of this exploitative, kind of unaware, destruction that can happen when you're unaware. So let's raise our awareness. Let's have fun while we're doing it with people that we care about.
Yes, and that doesn't sound easy, but it sounds necessary, right?
Yes. Climate crisis isn't easy either.
No, and it is difficult because I'm sure I, like you, am talking to people on a regular basis who say, I don't even know where to start because I really feel bad about this or about that, but what can I do, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm so glad you talked about anything helping. And,
yes.
That's important for all of us to remember. Speaking of way beyond anything, let's bring this to a close with a little bit more about climatehope.us, which I got to say is an amazing organization. I certainly personally support it. And it makes me also, it reminds me too, to make sure that we know, that our audience knows that, you're a hip hop dancer and a surfer, and joy is part of your life, and bringing joy into climate is something that I'm delighted to say you are a natural for. But tell me a little bit about Climate Hope, please, and make sure that we at the end have all the tools we need to support it.
I'm also a lawyer, which I find joyful as well. I actually love my job as a lawyer. So Climate Hope started as a project called dancingforclimatejustice.com, which you can also find, which is now a project of climatehope.us. And it started at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, when I was sitting in my living room at home, shelter in place, not allowed to go into the office, worried about COVID, thinking, and I also need to keep moving on the climate crisis, but I just feel depressed all the time. So what's the thing that would actually give me energy and give me inspiration to actually think about climate? And I'm a huge fan of BTS, the K-pop group. And I said, let me see if I can learn some of their dances, and I'll do some dancing to BTS. And then I was like, let's try 100 days. So I started a project called 100 Days of Dancing to BTS to end the climate crisis. And I didn't know where it was going to go. I knew that there were some things I needed to figure out about my involvement in climate. So I just started filming myself on Zoom dancing. I would learn these dances. I would do like pieces of it. If you look at dancingforclimatejustice.com, like there's varying qualities in terms of like how I'm doing it, but it's really my journey of figuring out how to stay joyful and using that as a place to talk about climate. So I started, the first day was the introduction, and then day 2 through 8, there's 7 members of BTS. Day 2 through 8 were each member of BTS. I just talked about them, where they were from, how the climate crisis impacts where they're from. And then I would look for news stories or people that they're associated with to talk a little bit about that. That first 8 days, I learned that actually the chair of the IPCC, the UN body, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is actually a professor in Korea. So I talked about him, and now I'm fangirling him, this wonderful professor who's been chair of the IPCC, Professor Ho-Sung Lee. So I'm telling that story by way of saying, like, then it became a project about like, oh, if I can do this, how can I encourage other people to go for their joy? So I was having some conversations with people, and one of my friends, who's actually one of our designers on the project, she's like, well, why BTS? And I said, because I love it. And then she's like, oh, and then from that conversation, we're like, oh, because it gives me joy. And then we're like, let's do our project about hope and joy. So that's climatehope.us. We keep encouraging people to look for their hope and joy to end racism and to end the climate crisis. And I think that's really the best perspective, because both of those can feel that like too overwhelming. And it's like, no, just keep doing it from a perspective of love and joy. And remember your relationships and just keep trying, even when it feels discouraging. So you can visit us at climatehope.us. You can check out our Instagram feed, we have a Twitter feed and a Facebook feed, but I think our Instagram feed is the most dynamic right now. We also have a Dancing for Climate Justice feed on Instagram. And lately I've been doing BTS dance challenges from Instagram. So you can join our email list. I think that's the best way to stay involved, because we'll keep you updated that way. Or if you're on Instagram, you can join us on Instagram.
Awesome. Yay. I am so glad we got that out. And I am so glad that you are doing the work you do. There's so much more we could talk about. I want to ask you, if we're having this conversation again in a year or two, what do you hope we'll be talking about? What progress do you hope we'll be talking about?
We're doing a project on climatehope.us called 100 Stories of Joy, Hope, and Climate Action. And if you want to learn more about Kevin James Morrison, you can visit us, because we have one of our stories where we interviewed you. I'm hoping we would get much closer to 100 stories by a year from now. We can do the more funding we get, the faster we can go with our stories, but we can also go at the pace we're going. I think the more stories we get up, the more connections we make to people, and the more people that will be talking about joy and hope. So I'd love to see 1 million more people involved in climate action, and people doing it with this perspective of optimism.
Yay, me too. All right, Alma, thank you for your time. Enjoy your Earth Month here, and we'll talk soon.
We'll talk soon. Bye, everyone.
We're here with Renay Jenkins. I am just delighted that she is here to tell us a little bit about her journey. Renay, who you are, what you do, what your days look like day to day, and why you're involved in helping make this planet better. In particular, make something really close to all of us better, which is the shore, the land around the San Francisco Bay.
I was honored enough to be a part of Mothers and Fathers Committee. Mary Harrison and Tessie, a few others in the community came together and just started speaking out against PG&E and, just the different entities that are making money off of impacting negatively the health of the community. So that's how I became involved. And, it also comes from my background as well, being born and raised in San Francisco, and then being able to move away and get the privilege of going to college. And my experience has been a little different. English major with Afro-Am literature. So once I started to realize, like Maya Angelou's and Zora Neale Hurston's of the world, that my perspective is a little bit unique, and that if my voice is not being heard, just imagine those on top of Hunters Point, and who looking right down at the shipyard and can't have nothing to say or no outlet to speak to. How are they feeling? For instance, the same things that's happening at the Superfund site are happening at Treasure Island. There's a community that lives there. They've got radiation in the soil. They don't know if they want to clean it up. They don't know what they want to do, but the community is still sitting there having to pay rent or figure out how they're going to survive every day. So it's just kind of like, if these corporations have money, they should put it into healing and making retribution to the community and cleaning up correctly. I can talk about this for hours and hours and hours, just because it seems like once we kind of got to California from down south, it was like, oh, California is going to be, no racism, no sexism. We left all of that, old boy network behind, but it's still the same challenges in the sense of the infrastructure and the institutions. So this is a good time now where a lot of youth are looking at things with fresh eyes, and a lot of the myths and stereotypes are starting to go out the window. And it's a good time right now for healing.
You know, I am so glad that you have brought this all to the table right at the beginning of our conversation, because for me, someone who's tried to pay attention to the environment and fight on the right side of the fights that are all around us, it was embarrassing to hear a couple of years ago, really for the first time, understanding there's radioactive contamination in San Francisco coming up from the soil after decades and decades of abuse of our land. How did I not know that? You must meet people like me occasionally who say, yeah, I didn't even know any of this. What do you say to them? Like, am I not paying attention?
Well, it's not that you're not paying attention. It's just these are marginalized and underrepresented communities. Like, for instance, the same thing happens in East Palo Alto, and it used to happen a lot just because of, I want to say, like right by the water, the marshland over there. So it's just kind of like a whole systemic racism thing that we have to kind of derail. We have to change that up some way so that people are empowered and are on a upward trajectory. But the main thing is to see, like, in 2 years where we're at, because it's finally coming to the forefront. But I mean, you would think people would know, but I didn't really know about Clear Lake not being so clear. So like, if you're not in the area, if you're not in Lake Tahoe, you wouldn't know. So before I forget, I know I have to go, but I did want to find out what made you decide to do this broadcast like that. Like, what got you involved? It's obvious that we were in a dilemma that we need help. We need to clean up the environment, and we all need to work together to change, what's going on socially. But what made you do like the YouTube channel? And I noticed that you've got it's like, what, 5 years? You've been doing it about 5 years now.
Well, I mean, yes, the Earth Day Always broadcast came to me because I wanted people to have something to remind them that Earth Day isn't a single day. It's not even a month. It's like we have to have it all the time. Because I was starting to become more involved with social media, production for nonprofits. My business was for a long time helping big companies communicate, and then I started switching my business to helping nonprofits do the work that is so important. I mean, not that there aren't plenty of businesses that do good work and do well, but the nonprofit world, the environmental world, it's something familiar to me from back in the 70s when I worked on my first political campaign, and it was about the environment. It was a different time, but that's how I got here. I do also want to say that one of the things that really keeps me going now and opens my eyes all the time is this notion that sea level rise. You talk about that and people think, oh, it is terrible. It is dreadful that there are islands in the Pacific that are being inundated. People are losing their homes, their cultures, and that is terrible. That is dreadful. But what we don't realize, and I say we collectively, like the Bay Area, is that as sea level rise comes up and groundwater rises and brings contaminants from low in the soil, that brings up incredible things, radiation and pollutants and contaminants that we thought were buried decades ago are coming back to say, no, we're still here. And like I said, the first time I understood that was happening in Hunters Point and Bayview, and from all the things that the shipyard brought to the soil, I was flabbergasted.
Yes, there's the possibility of vapor intrusion and like safe drinking water. So like I said, I think it's amazing that our paths have crossed, and I'm looking forward to doing lots of work with you because I've been kind of had a lot of myths and stereotypes in my head, like, I don't like that social media. It's for a lot, but I'm starting to see it as a tool. The more research, the more education, the community is getting more aware. And we're realizing that our slogan has been a clean up, not cover up, and people over profit. So we're starting to realize that we have control, we have rights, we can be empowered. I'm starting to realize that it starts with me, hello. And then once I believe, then I can convince others to believe or see for themselves. And so on that note, like I said, I'm looking forward to us doing more work video-wise. And I'm sure it won't be overnight like what you have gotten accomplished, but start now. And
Renay,
right,
you are very humble and generous. If we're gonna go into the accomplishment Olympics, I'm gonna be happy to be on the medal stand with you on the top. Hey, I know there are people out there right now who are saying, I love that, Renay. What can I do to help? I mean, do you have a mailing list? Do you have a 501c3 where dollars can be donated? What can people do to help you?
We work closely. We partner closely with Green Action and with the Marie Harrison Foundation. So on that note, thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you.
That has changed the world.
This is the beginning of a conversation that we will revisit, and I am so grateful for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we are here with Tania Abdul. And Tania, it is such a pleasure to talk to you about the big picture stuff, all the stuff that we don't necessarily get a chance to talk about when we see each other regularly. So welcome. Tell us a little bit about you and your work.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation. And we cover so much in the meetings for the coalition that it's hard for us to get a chance to know each other on a personal basis. And that is such a big part of our work. Breathe is very much about building the relationships that lead to movement, that cause momentum to be engaged, like to be sustained in movements. And about me, I've been an activist. I would call myself an activist proudly for decades. And it has been inspiring, and it's absolutely who I am. And it's also been rather frustrating for decades, where it feels like there's a lot of effort that goes untapped. There's a lot of energy and emotion that dissipate without becoming impactful. So that's how we came to Breathe. We developed Breathe originally to help people make the connection between racial justice and the climate chaos and the climate crisis, I guess. And then we kept growing, and we've arrived at something that I have yet to find anywhere else. I've been looking because I would love to collaborate or join forces with others for sure. Like, we don't have this mindset of, this is my problem to solve. I have to compete with other people who are trying to solve the same problem. No. We are all about, joining forces. That's the mindset that is the winning mindset, I believe. So relationships, I think it's pretty well recognized within the circles we live in, that we work in, that the heart of an organization, the heart of a community, the heart of movements like political movements and cultural movements are those relationships. It's all about the relationships. So, in order to make any progress on any one of the many, many fronts under the umbrella of racial justice, environmental justice, climate justice, there's so many different places that we need to accomplish to make progress. In order to do that, we people who are focusing on one piece of the puzzle need to be supportive to other people who are working on other pieces of the puzzle, because it's not the kind of thing that we can do step by step. And we're all feeling that time pressure. We can't wait for incremental progress to take us into, centuries down the road. And we're like, hey, look at it all came together. No, we don't really have time like that. And I don't even know if that would ever be successful, because so much of what we need to do it requires a lot of people power. It requires a lot of people putting in what they can afford to do, like that bit of time, attention, their network, some cash, so their ideas, their solutions, that time spent, influencing their representative. That's a lot of people making the effort that they can afford to. So.
You're so articulate. That's been something that I've always remarked to myself about whenever you've been talking part of a meeting. I'm wondering, as a good communicator, how do you get people to just understand what it is you do and why you do it?
It's funny. I've been practicing at the Bioneers conference this past week, and it comes out differently almost every time. And it's like, okay, it has to be different for different folks who see a different piece of it, or depending on what they're working on. It's a complicated and ambitious solution, breeds, so it can be a lot. But I start off by calling us a movement building organization to differentiate between what we do versus an amazing organization that's got a particular solution in a particular place that's laser focused. We are here to support the folks who are doing that by showing up with an engaged group of people who are already part of our network, who are ready to support, or at the very least follow along or share resources in some way, even if they don't necessarily follow the specific calls to action. So, for instance, if you're a neighborhood that's struggling with a particular issue, are you going to be able to, you put out signs and you manage to get enough people to post on their, social media that we're having a rally, and you spend all this effort. Do you have the resources or the infrastructure to get everybody's names and put them on a database and a mailing list, and create a social media account and have somebody monitor it and post it and keep people engaged, so that, 6 months down the line, when you get that meeting with the representative or your mayor or whatever, and you need the people again, do you have to start from scratch, or do you have them already there? It's just a lot to ask for. And at any scale, this is true, whether it's a neighborhood initiative or statewide work. There's just a lot of energy and resources that go into finding those people and getting them out. And I don't know about you, but I've been to a lot of protests and rallies and demonstrations, and almost never has my name been taken down by different organizations and been contacted later, or I don't necessarily know how to find out if our rally had any impact, if there was anything that happened in, the council chambers or the legislature in response to the work we did. Maybe I might see a news article, or maybe not, covering what we did. And I'm always left wondering, it felt good to me, and it probably felt good to other people, and made us feel like we're all, that we have a posse, that people care. And that feels really good, and that helps keeping you hoping. But, I'd really like to see some more tangible influence. So.
Well, you are talking about something that has always struck me about the environmental movement, and also about just the call to action that all of us feel one way or another. Mm-hmm. The environmental movement is all theoretically rowing in the same direction, but I'm sure that there can be little turf wars, and there can be little, I don't think we should put it that way, starts of discussions that can then become ends of discussions. And it's hard to foster a sense of camaraderie and making sure that we all just keep that big picture in mind. Mm-hmm. That said, we also face the struggle of bringing other people in, people who are outside the tent of environmentalism, and say, well, I don't know, I don't have time anyway. But how do you connect with them? What's your pitch?
Well, these are two very important points that I'd love to speak about how I think that Breathe offers some solution. First of all, speaking about what could be considered infighting, or the struggles that happen within an intersectional movement, or even between, when you wouldn't even say intersectional, like just neighbors having a difference of opinion, of strategy, tactics. And this is just a classic thing that helps movements disintegrate. It just happens a lot. When you're talking about people who are in trauma and fear, in a sense of scarcity, it takes us, when we're in that state, our nervous systems are feeling that fight or flight, you might have heard of, like, state. We make decisions from, this is very well covered, like science has told us, we make decisions from a place of competition with whoever we're talking to. Like, we feel like we're in opposition, even if there are actually our allies. We have a sense of not seeing the whole person before us, especially if we're talking with somebody who we feel is not our ally. They become like two-dimensional. We have a hard time seeing where we have common ground and the humanity in each other. And we have a narrowed set of resources from which to make our decisions. We don't see our place as being generous, or like our ability to be generous. And then the other side is, if you can find a place where you are in the or the rest and repair side of your nervous system, you can take the time and see the people that you're working with as other humans who have other, like, cares and things that you have in common with each other. And it's so much easier to have cooperative decision making and find a place of compromise, find a place that serves, and reach out and do that across the aisle work that we always hear about in our ridiculous government. I'm sorry, it's just kind of gotten really ridiculous. So the idea that with Breathe, our idea that we can do things that help us see each other as whole beings. Like, for instance, when we talk about our stories that we share, the storytelling that we do in Breathe, we offer a holistic picture of the community, not just the trauma and the terrible story, the atrocity. It's about the history, the culture, the vibe, the art, the music of a community. So you're seeing each other as whole beings with something you can relate to. And we definitely like having activation events, we call them, where people are coming together over food, having some music or some performance and some, inspirational speaking, and maybe a celebrity or a rock star, which also helps. Then people are like connecting on a human level. So hopefully we'll be able to find a way to learn to listen to each other first, instead of coming to the table, defending our demands all the time, which I feel like is going to lead to more insight and how we can work together. So that's the sort of inside, internal. And then number two, when thinking about how do you convince people who have, like we have, witnessed a lot of marches and parades happening with maybe not a lot of direct impact reported or accounted for. Like, I mean, that could definitely be our media also. We don't really hear about the hard work it really takes to have change, but we've seen change. Like it has happened. We've seen successes. I mean, the organizing, one of the main organizers of the coalition that we're in, Green Action, has had amazing, has a great track record of actually getting work done in environmental justice issues in California and the Southwest. So it is true, it's possible. But then, people feel like it's not worth my time. I'm not an activist because you have to be this like crazy anarchist, like running around in the street or like living in some kind of giant co-op house with, 12 roommates. I don't know, like the image of an activist tends to be, I don't know, not my image, but there's sort of a general idea that activism is for those people. And no offense, I'm an activist, as I said it proudly earlier, but if people can see that that moment when they were so moved by this story that they just felt like they had to do something, and they made a phone call, or just like put their name in and signed a petition, or maybe even they donated $20. With Breathe, if they're part of our action network, then they're going to be able to see exactly what happened and how many other people did what they did. And, oh, that group is telling us that thing went somewhere, and now they're able to do this next thing, and they're going to meet with, Representative so-and-so, and they're reaching out to me again. Oh, now I'm like on the team, and there's a whole bunch of us here, and maybe there's, maybe it wasn't just a waste of my time or attention or money that I foolishly got involved that one time. That's the idea, is that then they're going to tell their friends like, hey, yeah, this is really heating up. It's a new thing. I know that you care about, I heard you like comment the other day about how, sad it is that this thing is happening. Like, hey, I've been doing this great thing. Come on, like, check it out. And then that's our plan. That's our like idea for like helping people to feel like, oh, I'm part of this whole engaged movement. This is really exciting. Like, this is different. This is changing things just because they actually are staying in touch. Maybe they're getting some like pat on the back for like, hey, thank you so much. What you did was really appreciated. I think there's a lot of that.
It sounds to me, I mean, I feel like your organization, Breathe, should be part of every other organization. You should be connected to and amplifying other organizations with this same thought process, this same mandate. Is that the plan eventually, that you're going to have 1,000 clients?
The plan is, it's not community partners, members of our network. And the thing is, I want to build a container that helps catalyze those relationships and gets our snowball growing. And then it should theoretically keep growing on its own. And we'll just have to keep buying more server space, which is great. That's the plan. So the idea of a utterly scalable platform that people can take, and all of the amazing things that might emerge as different organizations are seeing how they can support each other and feeling their power. Like, it's beyond what we can dream of, having not seen it before.
Yeah. So, I'd love to close with a couple of things. One is the evergreen question of what is the biggest challenge you see coming in the next year or two? And then there's also the evergreen question, the flip side. What are you most looking forward to in the next couple of years?
So there's a lot of concerns. Big concern is the continual disaster situation that we'll face. We are going to, locally, where I live in Northern California, when the snow melts, this historic, insane snowpack, we're going to see levees flail, and we're going to see people get flooded out. The 395 freeway has been closed for months now because of an avalanche that happened with all the rain on a hillside that had a wildfire on it. So like stuff like that all over the country, as we continue to see the effects of climate change to be super obvious. When people are continually facing these threats or these like places where resources are scarce and people feel traumatized, that instead of turning to like community, because we haven't really created that sense in our culture that like community is here to take care of you, that there will be more hoarding or more fear and more xenophobia, like that there's going to be, while we see lots of examples that are wonderful of communities really pulling together, and I think that that's actually human nature, I think that there's been a lot of programming that makes us feel like we have to compete with each other. And I fear that there will be more strife, more racist acts, more, this disruptive, terrible things that cause us a lot of grief. So that stresses me out. And we're specifically working on bringing a lot of different community members together to support the cleanup of our coastal areas, our shorelines, as we face impending sea level rise and the corresponding groundwater changes. And that's just a huge question mark, exactly where the toxins will go and what they will do to us. It's really hard to predict. And so on the other hand, like that's something that I've been stressed about for a long time, low level stressed about what's going to happen across the planet as sea levels rise and all the stuff that's on our shoreline gets moved and distributed in a new way. But on the other hand, the work that we're doing makes me super hopeful. And I'm really, really excited about what's been happening for 2+ years now. We've been building this coalition for this laboratory of the San Francisco Bay of how do we pull together to get the agencies that all say, no, I think it's that other agency's jurisdiction, to actually do the stuff and be accountable to the communities that government is supposed to serve, even up to the U.S. Navy at the federal level, which is a pretty big fight for all of us. But I'm really hopeful that we're doing what we can, and a lot of people see the importance of it. So, maybe we'll be a really beautiful model, and we'll be able to share what we've done here and be able to clean up a lot of our shoreline before we're in trouble.
I love that answer. I love what you are doing. If someone wants to support you, whether they're an individual or they themselves are working with an organization, what should they do?
Well, come to breatheforjustice.org. Join our network. There is a prototype of our brilliant web platform with all the features that I'm building right now that will be, you'll be able to join it by Earth Day this year's Earth Day, which we're gearing up as in our coalition for a lot of different local events. So breatheforjustice.org. You can sign up on the mailing list right there and see what we're up to. Check out a trailer of the docuseries that we're producing. The first episode being on what's happening in San Francisco. And next, we have all kinds of exciting things on the docket. We're going to Utah, Northern California, the Southeastern United States, New Orleans. There's a lot of cool episodes to be produced. So stay in touch with us. Follow us on our social media. We're on Facebook, Breathe for Justice, Instagram, Breathe for Justice, Twitter, I think it's Breathe_network. Anyways, it's all on the website, breatheforjustice.org, all of it. So, and yes, we would very much welcome your donations to help build this platform and this network.
Yes,
But
yay.
most importantly, we want you to see what's going on with our community partners and support them. That's what we're here for.
Absolutely. That's lovely. That reminds me, by the way, I wish you luck in that all of your alliances and partnerships do not have a name as long as San Francisco Bay Shoreline Contamination Cleanup Coalition.
Yeah.
Did I get that right? I mean, I've only said it for a year.
Yeah, you got it right. Sometimes I've been making this the Shoreline Coalition, but the web address for that is sfbayshoreline.ccc.org. So we tried to make it a little better when you type it.
And yes, that is an improvement. In any case, Tania, thank you. Thank you for being here, and best of luck in your work.
Thank you. Same to you. Thank you so much, Kevin. Really appreciate this opportunity.
it is my pleasure to introduce Samantha Paladini. Now, I have known Samantha for many a year because, truth be told, she is my cousin, and that is a privilege and a pleasure. But here she is on this program to talk about her work, which I think is pretty amazing. And Samantha, why don't you tell me a little bit about you and your work?
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me on today. I'm Samantha Paladini, and I'm right now doing a fellowship in Boston, Massachusetts with a nonprofit called CREW, which stands for Communities Responding to Extreme Weather. And it's been a great experience working in climate justice, and I've learned so much, and I'm so happy to just be here and talk to you all about it.
I love the fact, by the way, that CREW, Communities Responding to Extreme Weather, is one of those names that once you hear it, you go, oh, yeah, okay, so I think I know what you do. But tell me, what's a given day like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. CREW, focuses on education, service, and planning when it comes to preparation for extreme weather. And for me, I am the Climate Resilience Hub Program Coordinator. So I get the pleasure of talking to a lot of organizations all over the country and offer crews resources and assistance when it comes to preparing their communities for extreme weather events and responding to them as well.
Can you tell the audience what extreme weather is? 'Cause I'm sure we're all nodding going like, yeah, when it gets to be 55 degrees here in the Bay Area, we think it's cold. But tell us a little bit about what that means in the context of CREW.
An extreme weather event might be a winter storm, blizzard, tornadoes, a heat wave. But we also offer a lot of other resources recognizing the interconnectedness between our physical and mental health in relationship to these events, and emphasizing the importance of social connectiveness in our communities and building climate resilience.
So I love that because it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We all need air, and we all need warmth, and we all need water. But then you get down to, we also need community, right? And that's part of what you build, what you help to rebuild.
Exactly. There's a lot of research out there about, how heat waves are actually one of the most dangerous natural disasters out there. And it's because the people who are isolated don't have the support groups or people or, resources to help take care of themselves during those events. And
so when we are seeing events like tornadoes or gosh, I can think of, back in Texas, and I think you have a success story from Texas, don't you? But I'm thinking right now of Texas a couple of years ago when there was such extreme cold that dozens of people died as a result of that. And that is extreme weather. So that is one of the examples of where you might be able to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. We provide a lot of resources and brochures and trainings and partnership opportunities for organizations in regards to these events. And yeah, everyone's sort of experiencing such unpredictable weather that, we just provide them all of the brochures, and it's hey, you choose what is relevant to what's happening in your climate. And you might be surprised. You might need some ones you didn't think about. But yeah, recently we just completed our onboarding of the Dallas Public Library System in our Climate Resilience Hub program. So we're really excited to be working with them. And yeah.
And that means that libraries, or some libraries within the Dallas system, will become refuges and points of gathering during a crisis, as well as an ongoing education thing?
Yeah. So to expand on what a resilience hub is, it can be any institution, in our definition, any institution that's open to the public, that wants to, help them help with engagement or support during these events. And this might include, like, we have different kinds of hubs, such as engagement centers, relief stations are under development, and emergency shelters. So everyone has different capacities in regarding to like how much they can offer to their community. So we do emphasize social connectiveness. So working a lot on engaging that community and making sure people know, hey, this is a place where you can cool off in the summer, or hey, this is a place where you can learn about insert whatever, or even tick-borne illnesses, like anything. It's sustainability, wide range of things, and we have a lot of different hubs as well. So it can be libraries, it can be an institution of faith. We work with community centers, nature centers, nonprofits, businesses. So we try to make it as accessible as possible, just so we can, get that language out.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It also makes sense to me, and I'm basing this on conversations we've had before about this, that a lot of your outreach is to lower income communities that don't necessarily have the wealth to build and maintain the kinds of education infrastructure you're offering, as well as, for that matter, a warming center or a cooling center. How does that fit in with your mission?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Crew is based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So we've gotten to work a lot with the universities. And this past summer, we did a research project on social connectiveness, but we've also done research on environmental justice communities, or EJ communities, and figuring out what areas in the Boston area are most vulnerable to these events, and focusing on disadvantaged communities, and definitely reaching out to them and making sure that we're not swooping in and telling them what they need, but like listening to them and hearing, like, finding the leaders in those communities and collaborating with them and working with them and figuring out what their needs are and supporting them. You
must have to explain what environmental justice is to groups, to people when you're talking to them. How do you explain what it is?
Yeah, exactly. It's the acknowledgement and consideration that there are disadvantaged communities where who are disproportionately being affected by these extreme weather conditions, natural disasters, than other people are feeling the effects of, like, redlining, the heat island effect, a lot of those issues that if you're not a part of, like, or in a low income community or low income, BIPOC, Indigenous, all of these communities are getting the brunt of these events, unfortunately, just from our system. And something we need to work on, and hopefully Crew can just reach out and create this conversation and work with them.
And I know that many in this particular audience will understand what you've just said, but part of what you're saying is that in terms of redlining, there was a time when if you weren't white and middle class, you might get pushed into a neighborhood that was next to a power plant or in a zone that might be flooded. That was just a thing, and it still happens, frankly. Yeah. One thing that I want to make sure you can do here is tell us how we can help. Does your organization take donations? Do we write to you and say, I want to help one of the neighborhoods or one of the cities in my area get its feet under itself for climate-related problems?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can reach out to our website, and there are definitely donation options there. We do a lot of collaboration with other organizations. We're always looking for grants to support giving out extreme weather preparedness kits, cooling kits, heating kits.
I'm curious if you ever have to have conversations with people who just are skeptical, like, this climate change, it's just not happening. There's hot days, there's cold days. Is there a conversation that you sometimes have with people to say yes and?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. For the most part, everyone I'm working with really cares about their work, which makes me feel very lucky and appreciative and grateful that they care about other people and their communities and their planet and their work. So I don't encounter that often. I think Crew uses the language extreme weather so we can reach more people as climate change has become a very polarized political word, which is just not the case. I mean, it shouldn't be the case.
You talk to people who get that, but you also talk to people who are still educating themselves, I assume.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so what is the plan? I mean, I know you're in an internship, so you're not going to be here at Crew even at this time next year, but what will the plan be? How will the organization move forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is a rotating position. Each fellow each year takes on the Climate Resilience Hub program responsibilities, but we have a lot of other programs going on. We host 2 educational events each year: Climate Prep Week in September, where a lot of our hubs come together, hold climate awareness events. We help them collaborate, support them on social media. And we have another event called the Interfaith Summit that's actually coming up on June 4th this year, where we bring lots of different institutions of faith come together for a day and create this discussion and tell stories and figure out ways how we can take action in our communities and just reach those who are so vulnerable. And and Crew does summer giveaways during the summer in vulnerable communities, giving out air conditioning units, emergency preparedness kits, educational workshops. So there's always something going on.
All right, Carleen, welcome back to this show. You were here a couple of years ago. It's so great to have you again. I'm especially glad to see you because a lot has happened in the last couple of years. You've been quoted in the New York Times about this study that Cool the Earth did. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about what that was?
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for having me again. It's really great to see you. We've been working at the community level to advocate for the transition off of fossil fuels onto clean electricity. And one of the things we've really been working on is the transition to electric vehicles. This has taken us from our community level at Marin County all the way to state and federal leadership so that we can make sure we're having an equitable transition.
And this is following in a kind of path for Marin County. Marin County, I think in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s really led the green space revolution, right? Protecting green space in county borders. And since then, we've started to look for leadership in other ways, like electric vehicles. How would you say we're doing as far as that goes?
So Marin has a pretty good transition number to electric vehicles, but we still have a really long ways to go. And one of the areas that we really need to be focused on is people who are in multi-family dwellings, in apartments or condos, and especially those in our low wealth communities, as they typically don't have charging at home. And we want to make sure that they have the same access and pricing that people are able to take advantage of if they live in a single family home.
And, I'm glad we're talking about EVs because there are so many myths that persist even from a couple of years ago. The EVs don't have range. EVs take too long to charge. What progress have we made in sort of getting the message out that those things are no longer true?
Yeah, so Kevin, there's really been a revolution in the auto industry and in the charging industry. And most of the cars now can go over 200 miles, some up to 500 miles between charges. And even if you stop to charge on the road, now the charging is so much quicker than it used to be. So literally you can get about 150 or 200 miles in about 20 minutes, and some cars even less than that. The price also has come down dramatically, and it used to be that to drive electric, you'd need to invest $90,000 in a vehicle. You can get some vehicles now for under $30,000. So it's really exciting to have these new opportunities. And one thing I want to point out, which is really exciting, is that already a handful of EVs can be used for backup power when there's a home power outage. And that's really exciting because we really have a dual purpose for our EVs, and it's taking us in a whole new direction of how we electrify our homes and our transportation systems.
I think this is great because so many of us have thought of this as a promise for so long, and now it's finally here, at least in a few cases, and spreading, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big gaps are that we need to reach that next level, really the mainstream market, and make sure that people are committed to making their next vehicle electric or switching to an e-bike, which is a really fun option as well and is very practical. And the big gap is for those in our low wealth communities. And I'm working right now, Congressman Huffman asked me to lead a coalition for Marin County and make sure that we're able to take advantage of federal funds for these communities. So we're in the process right now of working on that, and we're very engaged with our community-based organizations. We want to make sure that this transition and the charging infrastructure is built from the ground up, that we meet their constituents' needs, and that we really address some of those key areas of access and cost.
This reminds me. There's like you have a truck show coming in West Marin, which is the needs are different than everywhere. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's really exciting for some in our rural communities to be able to have the trucks they need to work, frankly, and that, when they're out in the fields and they need four-wheel drive and they need a vehicle that has higher clearance, it's really exciting. And I also want to point out that in West Marin, there's also a large Spanish-speaking community who tend to also be low wealth. So we're going to make sure that we address their charging needs as well. And there's some really interesting new charging solutions which are cost effective to implement in these communities and will really serve a wide variety of drivers.
I would be remiss if I also didn't ask you about your favorite electric vehicle, because I've heard you say something that would shock most people. Tell me a little bit about your favorite electric vehicle.
In our family, we typically lease our vehicles, and so we've had 7 of them. And I get this question all of the time. And I love so much about all the vehicles, and they all have their unique characteristics. But I have to say, my favorite EV is my e-bike. And I love traveling on my e-bike. I run to the grocery store. I have the side packs. I can just go on a daily basis, more like they do in Europe, and I have less food waste. Run to, the local drugstore. I ride my bike sometimes from Marin into San Francisco over the Golden Gate Bridge, which can be a little scary because it's so high up, but it's really a super enjoyable experience for me going to meetings. And so they're very practical. If you haven't driven one or ridden on one before, I really encourage you to do so, or come to the Mill Valley Earth Day event on April 23rd, where there will be a lot of e-bikes that you can check out.
Awesome. All right, last question. I can't help but notice that on your LinkedIn page, there's a couple of famous people and you're standing in between them. How did that tell us about the photo and what that was about?
So, Kevin, that was one of the most exciting parts of my work in the past 15 years, was meeting Secretary Granholm and Secretary Buttigieg. And I was invited to a very small invitation-only conference with them as they were announcing new federal funding for community-based access to EV charging. And as you know, we have done a significant amount of work in the past 2 years because we found that some of the public charging stations were not functioning. And this is an issue for people traveling on road trips, but it mostly is an equity issue because people in multifamily apartments are going to be looking for charging that's available publicly. So we collaborated with UC Berkeley and did a field test, first of its kind field test of the stations. And at that point, I started working with Newsom's team and also with Secretary Buttigieg's team on how we make sure that the stations are reliable. These are publicly funded, and we want to make sure that they work to drivers' expectations. So we've been working on that with them. We created a white paper with many technical pieces of advice, and really happy to say that the federal government and the state government have now implemented many, if not most, of our recommendations. And this will make a huge difference for the transition. We have billions of dollars coming into this space, and I'm very confident that the charging infrastructure will meet the driver expectations.
I think this is where we all have to sort of step back and applaud your work and be proud of the fact that you are here in Marin. So, Carleen, thank you for being here, and I look forward to hearing more next year.
Absolutely. And I just want to add in one more thing, which is I just want to say that there are so many people who've been involved with this. My team at Cool the Earth, volunteers from the Marin EV Squad, volunteers who bring their cars. We have so many different volunteers who are all part of this. I really wanted to express my appreciation towards them and know that this is really a team effort.
Yay. And here's to more people joining the team every day.
Yes, we're always looking for more folks to join in.
All right, Carleen, thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Kevin.
So Laura Neish is here with us, and Laura, it is such a pleasure to see you and get a chance to talk outside of, I don't know, Zoom meetings or something about who you are and what you're doing. I'm excited to hear you talk about that for myself. So welcome, Laura, and who are you and what do you do?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This is a real treat. Like you said, we have not bumped into each other recently, so it's nice to see you. So yes, I'm the executive director of 350 Bay Area and its sister organization, 350 Bay Area Action. So I'll start with the action side. It's a 501c4 corporation, which gives us a lot more latitude for lobbying. So that's where we really center our state level lobbying for different climate bills in the California legislature. And then, as you might remember, that group has also started doing endorsements. So that kind of sets up a little bit our theory of change, which is, or 350 Bay Area specifically, their theory of change, which is that the best way to get things to move really quickly is to change the policies that drive corporate decisions and individual behavior, and then the options on the table. So as we've gotten into electoral politics, we've discovered a couple of things. First of all, it's really, really hard. Politics is an art all unto itself. And we as an organization are, across all of our groups, very savvy about policy, but the politics and the machinations behind the scenes are really tricky. So we think that, as we move into electoral politics, we can reshape primarily our city and county level organizations and those groups, those bodies that are making these decisions. So we get to know the people through our endorsement process and through the normal work we do at the local level through our local groups. And then we can bring those elected officials up to speed about what the different issues are. Because, as you know, local decision makers cover all of it: houselessness, climate, education, policing, everything, zoning, all of the nuts and bolts. And sometimes they just really need people who've done the deep dive policy work to educate them on what's going on. And I can give some examples of that later if you want. So within that, yeah.
No, go on. You're on a roll. I'm excited to hear your examples, and I was going to ask you a little bit. Keep going.
Yeah. So then on the more traditional nonprofit side, which is 350 Bay Area, then we do dig deep on those different kinds of policies, and we support our local groups that are doing the work in the local Bay Area counties. And on the 350 Bay Area side, we do the fun stuff in the agencies. So we have really helped educate a whole lot of people about why the Bay Area Air Quality Management District is important and the kinds of leverage that they have. And we've had some really major successes there, like increased emissions controls in the refineries. And really recently, the appliance rules they're essentially going to phase out gas water heaters and gas furnaces very quickly. So that's the kind of power that is embodied in that particular agency. And it's so exciting to me as just a human being and as the executive director to see our young people showing up at this bizarre, nobody knows about it agency and testifying about why these things are really important, because they are. Or we're also, you probably know, we also do a lot of work at the Public Utilities Commission and the Energy Commission, and then we support our local groups. So that's kind of a big overview of what we do. The other important thing to understand is we have a very small staff. We have 4 full-time staff and some part-time people supporting now over 50 volunteer leaders who work with us for 20 or more hours a week. And then a couple of hundred of people that pitch in, monthly or weekly at a lower level. So we're pretty excited about it.
It's so funny hearing you explain that you're working at the local level, at the county level, at the regional level, you work at the state level, and do it with all of the governmental organizations, the non-governmental organizations, with a volunteer. You've got a volunteer staff, you're working, I'm sure, with other grassroots organizations, and all of that makes me crazy, because the idea that you're keeping that all going at any given time, I think must be a huge job.
Well, it might. I mean, the commitment and capability of our volunteer leaders, it would blow your socks off. I mean, these are just people who know what the heck they're talking about, either because of their long history in a related industry or profession, or because they've really dug in and they understand the policy implications of all of these things. And then the other thing that really makes my heart sing is that part of our platform is that we keep justice at the center. And all of our volunteer leaders and all of our policy decisions do that in a big way. And you're right. We work with a lot of different allied organizations, and sometimes we lead and sometimes we follow. And, when it comes to the environmental justice community, the people that are suffering on the front lines, they get to lead, and we do what we can to support them. And then they also really appreciate this sort of policy evaluation that we do, which is not easy. It's a lot.
I wonder if you might back up even further, believe it or not, and explain a little bit about 350. Like people will say, well, no, what is 350? What is that name about? And I've heard about 350 organizations like over somewhere else where my friends live. Are they related? And I bet you get that question.
We do. 350 is a little bit of a wonky, obscure name. So just to get that out of the way, 350 refers to a hypothesis several years ago about what the safe level of CO2 was in the atmosphere as measured in parts per million. So it's 350 parts per million. We've now blown past 420 parts per million. This is a catastrophe, and everything we can do to keep that from going up is super important. So you'll hear another sort of line in the sand of 1.5 degrees Celsius, and there's no cliff. We've already approached some of the tipping points that the climate scientists are worried about. Every little tiny bit we can shave off from this number going off is a benefit to us and helps us, increase the odds of surviving, on the planet. So that's a very stark way to put it, but that's kind of where we are. So 350.org sprang up. That's Bill McKibben and some college students started that up. Oh gosh, it's been a long time now, 15 years, 12 years, something. And we're organizing a couple of big marches. So 350.org started this activity. And then a lot of groups that they refer to as local groups sprung up all over the world and all over the country that were these volunteer organizations that were raising money to get people to the march or to just give to the march organizers or whatever. And then some of those groups really stayed in place. And we are one of the bigger ones in the US, and we collaborate with the other bigger groups, some of the smaller groups, and with 350.org. We are not at all part of 350.org, but we can only use their name if we work on climate and agree to nonviolent direct action. So it's kind of their rules. There are a couple of other little rules to keep, regional conflicts out, but it's a great organization. We're really pleased to work with them.
Someone coming to this program on Earth Day, let's say, here we are, 2023 Earth Day, might hear us talking and go, oh my gosh, this is so complicated. There are so many moving parts. What can I do? And how can I even possibly begin to help when people who are spending a lot of time on this say, well, this is pretty complicated. How do you simplify things for folks?
What we need to do and what we need to do quickly is pretty simple. We need to ramp down our use of fossil fuels. And I'm just going to make that a bigger category and say we have to stop burning stuff. I don't care what it is. We have to stop burning stuff. And then we have to ramp up clean energy, and we have to use that clean energy, which is electricity, to drive our systems, our cars, our appliances, our homes, our businesses, our industry. And that technology is in place, and it is largely in many different areas. Industry is its own special thing, but in many different areas, it's more affordable than the fossil fuel alternatives. So that's the simple part. So how do you get that done? Right now, what's standing in the way? What is standing in the way? It's the fossil fuel industry, and they've been lying to us for years. So as an individual, yes, you can make the changes that, put solar in your roof, drive an EV, things like that. That's really an important signaling thing, but even more than just doing those things, is talking to people about it and saying, this is important, and spreading the word. Because what we think is that if we can have more and more and more people communicating to the people they elect that they need to do something, we at 350 Bay Area and 350 Bay Area Action are super good at saying, here's a phone call you can make, here's an email you can send, here's a place you can show up to directly talk to your elected officials. Here's an elected official that is not doing anything about climate. Let's elect this other person who is a climate champion, we call them. So those are the things that really have the most impact, talking to people and engaging with the people that you elect. Basically, starting to pay a little bit of attention. And I know it's hard. This is a very stressful thing to think about. But when you're working with a group like 350 Bay Area or any other climate group, something, find a group and you will meet some of the coolest people you've ever met in your life, and you will feel better because things are happening. When we passed I talked about the work we did at the Air District, and I love those examples because the Air District Board is made up of elected officials from throughout the region, people on city councils and county boards. And we expected those two big decisions to be squeakers, like we were really sweating it. And those decisions, I think the most recent one was all but unanimous. Somebody abstained and somebody wasn't there. So, and that to me is where the hope lies. If we can build the base for action at the local level, then it provides the political support for statewide action. California, people look to California as a leader. We are not perfect. We are making all sorts of dumb decisions about climate. 350 Bay Area is there to point them out, to push and make the right decisions. But if we can get California to really aggressively do the right thing, we are depending on who's counting and when, we're the fourth now biggest economy in the world. It creates the markets. And then the cost for the things like the heat pump water heaters and heat pump air conditioning and heating systems in people's homes, they get cheaper and cheaper. So this is where the action is. And it is much more fun to do this stuff with people. If you have a chance to go to Sacramento on a lobby day around climate, do it. It's a blast. It'll change the way you think about your role in the political system, where we are not as powerless as we are being told we are, especially at the local and state level.
I'm so glad you're saying that, because it does give me hope. And I know that you, at the same time you want to give people hope, you also want to be clear, as you are being clear, that we're not perfect. And even though we're here in the Bay Area, which is crunchy granola green, there are plenty of people who are in policymaking positions who are not aware of what they might do better, or are just not kind of leaning into environmental and climate change fights that we think they should. How do you rally the troops when you find someone that you really want to make an impression on and hopefully lobby for?
Are you talking about electoral politics, like endorsements, or yeah?
I think electoral politics is important to people because they know that, someone's out there saying, well, all of my city council and all of my county supervisors, they're great. They're totally green. Chances are that's not true, but I feel like when we're in the Bay Area, that's kind of what we think.
Yeah, I think, that is an interesting point. So every once in a while, we come across somebody, one of our elected officials who has been amazing in terms of supporting really solid climate policy, and folks who've listened to us about that and absorbed it. It's, there's always a lot of information. And then all of a sudden they'll make like a clunker decision. You're like, what is this? They'll support a bill that doesn't make any sense. And I think that's different depending on who it is. So one, they may just not know. Like, people have a huge misunderstanding about biomass as a solution. It's not a solution. We have to stop burning stuff, full stop. And hydrogen, holy macaroni. It's not that complicated, but when people talk about hydrogen, we're so desperate for a magic bullet. Hydrogen is not it for the most part. And then the misinformation that's getting pumped through at very high levels by the fossil fuel industry makes those things seem more attractive than they are. So some of it is misinformation. Some of it is follow the money. Some of our elected officials take money from the fossil fuel industry and they like that money. One of the, there's a couple of root causes to where we are, how we are where we are. And one of them is money in politics and this stupid Citizens United decision. And, just a history of intransigent approach to change, no, this is, whatever. So, but a lot of it is that it's when you think about the climate change issue, it is stressful. It's depressing. It's this weird slow motion emergency. A lot of times it gets taken out of context because in the broader context where all of our biosystems are sort of under attack right now. And the notion that we can just keep extracting forever, it's ruining all of the systems that support us. So you go skip, hop, skip, and jump, and it's like now the problem is way big, so big that I can't even deal with it. So just find your thing and push on that thing and let your officials know, what's going on. Because I think that is what's happening. And you look at the young people and they get this much more from the systemic point of view. And I think more and more people are understanding the roots, the entangled roots of colonialism and racism and how that's impacting things. So we're just trying, like, as a species, we are trying to work our way through some really knotty problems and get, fight back against this concept that greed is good and recognize our role in the whole way that the system operates. Well, that one got really big really fast.
I appreciate it when the context is made clear that it is not just about, tailpipes or factories. It's about a whole range of things that do, in fact, go back hundreds of years. And even though there are plenty of people who will step back and fold their arms and say, that's just nonsense, when they take the time to listen and listen with an open mind about all kinds of related items, then I see heads nodding, and it's just finding that time, finding that persuasiveness, which reminds me there are going to be people out there right now saying, I love that, Laura, what can I do? How can I get involved with 350 and or can I just, can I give you a few dollars? What should people do for you and for 350?
Well, that a few dollars would be super, super helpful. And you can do a tax-deductible donation at 350bayarea.org. We also, it's harder to raise money on the other side. Most people don't actually list their charitable, contributions because they take the standard deduction, which everybody's thinking about right now, today. But and then also on 350bayareaaction.org. And as much as we need the money, because our small staff supports all these volunteers, sign up for our newsletters. And when we say, here's a thing you can do the thing. It takes, my dream is that everybody remotely concerned about climate and justice and all that in the Bay Area, which is over 60% of the population for sure. If they had the email addresses and phone numbers of their elected officials on their phones. And so we said, here, do the thing. They're like, I can make this phone call. It takes me less than a minute. And it takes less than a minute. And you're not ever delivering a white paper. You're just sort of saying, because when you call your state legislators in particular, there's somebody there who just ticks next to a bill. They just are keeping track. You don't have to say anything except, this is who I am. I am your constituent, and I support or oppose this bill. And that's kind of true for a lot of different things. Now, if you want to get more involved, super easy to write letters to the editor. You follow what we're talking about. We give you some language, some talking, like all of the things. I tell you, it's pretty addictive when you get a letter to the editor published. You may think that who reads the newspapers? Who's like, well, I'll tell you who reads the newspapers is the people we elect. Always, always, always get cuttings or get reports on the letters to the editor and such. And then that shapes the coverage of the newspaper. So if they get a bunch of letters to the editor about a topic, then they're going to follow it more closely. So things like that, come to our meetings, learn the things, work with some really cool people. So.
Well, and I'm here to raise my hand and say, yeah, that's what I got happy about when I got to know 350 and you and the organization in general. So many cool people to meet at any given meeting or on any given Zoom meeting, really. Laura, you're amazing. I look forward to having this conversation next year and getting a full report about all the people you've inspired to take action. And in the meantime, let me just say thank you. This has been great.
Thank you. Well done. I loved it.
Alrighty, we are here with Chance Cutrano, who wears many hats and does some very cool things. And I got to ask right off, Chance, what is the name of your bird?
The bird on my shoulder, we just call it the Baird or the bird. They don't really have a name per se.
All right, fair enough. I want to mark this as my first interview of a distinguished guest with an equally distinguished bird on his shoulder. So yay for that.
Trying to bring those pirate vibes to the interview,
As you should. All right. Well, Chance, I have had the pleasure of knowing you for a handful of years and know a little bit about you. But if you could tell our audience who don't know you a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. Thank you, Kevin, for having me and for doing these excellent interviews around Earth Day and Earth Month. My name is Chance Cutrano, he, him, his pronouns. Located and doing a lot of my work within the unceded ancestral homelands of the Coast Miwok here in Marin County, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge. I wear many hats. I, by day, am a director of an environmental think and do tank that's about 40 years old. It's called the Resource Renewal Institute. So I direct programs there. And then in the other hours of my day, I am the chair of the Sierra Club San Francisco Bay chapter, and I am also the current mayor of the town of Fairfax in Marin County. And then I have other board obligations like, board secretary for international rivers and things like that. But those first three are the ones that take up the majority of my bandwidth these days.
So it is fair to say that most days you are concerned about what is happening in the environment. You are working to promote a better, healthier planet for all of us. Can you give me just, an example of what an hour in your day might look like?
Yeah, an hour in my day might look like connecting with different consultants from around the United States, whether it's scientists with land grant institutions in the South that I'm working with on sustainable agriculture projects with rice farmers in Arkansas. And I might, in that same hour of time, hop over onto a call with cartographers trying to map biodiversity and look at different layers of California's Central Valley, for instance, looking at the Pacific Flyway or things like that. And so it's both conceptual, high-level visualizations of landscape-level conservation, as well as nitty-gritty applied research on the ground and working with teams to realize improvements on the ground as well.
Can you give me an example of one of the thorny problems which you are tackling these days?
Yeah, I think there are myriad thorny problems. I think one of the ones that I think about a lot right now actually comes from my public sector work that I do as the mayor of Fairfax, but also as a transportation commissioner in Marin County. And there's so many transportation improvements that we need to make to shore up climate resiliency for low-income communities, but really across the entire coastline and our inland baylands as it relates to sea level rise and nuisance high tide events, king tide events, which have been increasing incredibly over the last 50 years. And for me, what keeps me up at night is thinking about how we have this incredible historic moment with this current administration bringing so much money to climate issues, whether it's clean energy or clean transportation, et cetera. And at the same time, we need to do so much across the entire state, country, continent, world. And it makes me think about that movie, like Everything Everywhere All at Once. That's what kind of stresses me out, is just knowing that we have such a limited amount of time to get climate resilient and get prepared and start to make adaptations while we're still full foot on the gas pedal for mitigation to mitigate the worst impacts of the climate crisis. And so it's like, how do we prioritize in such a situation when there's so many people who are not necessarily communicating, that are in different silos, and they're all competing for the same pots of money, which are a lot bigger, and yet they're still limited. So that's something that's keeping me up, is thinking about how we mitigate that sea level rise across everything all at once.
I think sea level rise is one of those issues that's going to gain more understanding as people recognize that it's, yes, sea levels rising globally and inundating small island nations, which is pretty awful when you lose your home to the ocean, but it's also bringing up levels of groundwater where we live, and we're not always sure what's in that groundwater. Will there be toxics? Will there be radioactive materials coming up from old military installations? People are still learning about that. I mean, the vast majority of people are still learning about that. What part of your day is, just educating people, trying to find the right ways to connect?
Yeah, I think that has been an ongoing challenge. Is my boss, who passed away in 2020, Huey Johnson, who was a big environmental titan in his own right, he used to, reflect to me, how do you want to approach these issues? Is it systemic? Is it working at the local level? There's some people who can spend their, a significant amount of their energy working to fight one bulldozer. And then there are other people who spend a lot of their time working to fight, stop thousands of bulldozers, right? There are different levels that we can work at. And so for me, figuring out how do I communicate at scale, I guess, has been a challenge. And so moving towards some of the mapping projects and the visualization projects is my way of trying to engage with a lot of stakeholders at the same time and say, like, this is what we know now on the landscape, and these are the projections. Here are some layers to think about how things will change. And like, based on that best available information, where do we want to go? And trying to get people to the table and in the room together to just talk about those roadmaps, and then figure out what's the PR game for talking about that with the general public who, care about these issues and at the same time don't want to necessarily get bogged down in the weeds on these issues. And so, like, how do we make it a lot clearer and rarefy the different pathways we have before us?
Yeah. And I'm sure even though many of your friends are familiar with climate work, with environmental work, and Fairfax is itself an environmental leader, you probably routinely say something where someone, sort of snaps their head and looks at you and says, wait, what is that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, 100%. I think that's so true. whether it relates to how we prioritize transportation improvements, or how we consider becoming, more resilient related to our water supply. Like those things it's a constant conversation. I think, we passed in Fairfax last year some of the strongest green building codes probably in the state of California, and as a result in the country. And it's a small town, so it punches above its weight, but it will need to continue to, cross-pollinate the ideas with other partner jurisdictions. And even doing that work as a community, it still can be kind of a confusing thing that you have to revisit over and over. You pass the laws, and then you're still discussing them and trying to demonstrate, like, how does this show up in the real world? You come up with good ideas, and you still need to negotiate them and figure out how they actually play out. So it's a constant with constituents, with friends, with family, with other people in the field. Yeah.
Well, okay. So if you have someone who comes to you and says, how do I prioritize? This is most ordinary people say, I'd love to get an EV. Should I be looking how to manage that? I'd love to upgrade my cooktop and maybe do an induction cooktop. I heard that's great. Oh, by the way, I need to replace my heating system. Or is there a way for me to influence my landlord to replace the heating system with what is this thing that I've heard of? What is that again? Heat pumps? How do you offer advice to someone who is just trying to prioritize what they can do?
Yeah, well, again, it feels very much like that everything everywhere all at once. So I appreciate the call outs to induction cooktops and heat pumps and everything. But yeah, it's for me, I think there's the two realities that we have to hold at the same time. One, that we need to move as quickly as possible, and the other reality that, like, for a lot of communities, they can't necessarily afford to move and just snap their fingers and everything in their home changes and they have a Jetson home of the future or something. So I think looking at, what's within one's budget and what's within one's capacity. Like in a community, we have climate action coordinators in our communities that can help us demystify regulations and really incentive programs so that we can get government money, whether it's state or federal dollars, to help move some of these projects along quicker. I think the other thing that I look at is, the overall pie of emissions. If your goal is, doing your part in reducing emissions, I think transportation and the built environment are huge pieces of that pie. And then you have like your diet as another piece in affecting agricultural, forestry, and other land use type sectors. So, figuring out getting out of cars or having an electrified mode of transportation is super valuable for tackling the big elephant in the room, especially in a place like Marin County, where we have 100% deep green renewable energy through MCE. If you're in another community, you might want to check and see how you move the needle on getting to 100% renewable energy to power your home. And then you can start to electrify different appliances over time. And really, it's like at time of replacement, you should be trying to do that. You don't necessarily have to go out right now and replace everything, but at time of replacement, we need to replace every fossil fuel-based, dinosaur-based appliance and move from that Stone Age technology towards an electrified future. So I think it's piecemeal, step by step. You have to be mindful of the equity and economic constraints for individual households. And at the same time, there's a hell of a lot of money right now, and there are people that want to help everyone access that money. So it's an exciting moment to do it. And I think if people really want to do it, they can move the needle.
All right. Well, last question for you. Speaking of moving the needle, what are you most excited about? If we're having this conversation in a year or two, what do you hope to be talking about in a year or two?
Gosh, in a year or two, I'm really looking forward to seeing where we're at in the permitting process, big picture for offshore wind. I feel like offshore wind and grid modernization are going to be hugely beneficial to seeing more electrification of our transportation sector, more electrification of households, and really seeing the natural gas part of our energy portfolio, at least in California, seeing that start to take a downward trend as offshore wind comes online, because that's a heck of a lot of gigawatts of power that we can just feed into the grid, and that's there, day and night as long as the wind's blowing, and the wind is definitely blowing off the Pacific coast. So yeah, I'm excited to see where that is, because that'll be a game changer for everything that we do.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody the other day who said that the breezes right off of Point Reyes are among the handful of steady, reliable, very, very strong winds in all of the North American Western Shore. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple patterns that are quite strong. I mean, one down by Morro Bay as well. That's very strong, and then up in Humboldt. And the great thing is with offshore wind, you can get it far enough out there that you don't even see it on the horizon, right? It's like it exists. It's producing energy for all of our households, and we still get these amazing coastal vistas. And it's exciting opportunity, and yeah.
I am so excited to think that we will be talking about this, having, notched up a victory in permitting or planning, or gosh, we could go wild and say construction of said wind power. And there are many things that I look forward to talking to you about again. So Chance, thanks for making time.
Kevin, anytime. Happy Earth Month, happy Earth Day, and thank you again for all you do for the planet.
Cheers. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon with more Earth Day Always.